أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه وخاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيد الأولين والآخرين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers and sisters. Inshallah, tonight we'll be concluding in a way the 4 lectures, or this is going to be the 4th lecture on faith. We've dealt with justice, and I'll be ending this kind of lecture looking at how faith in itself can be cultivated or developed practically through our nafs, through our soul. And whenever we have discussed in the last 3 lectures, especially yesterday, what kind of coordinates or principles we need, as we saw in the hadith of the 5th Imam, where he said the Shia is a person that gives to orphans and is respectful to his parents and is a trustful person and does not backbite. The final question which arguably remains is how we do all this. What is the way in which we can be this very complete person and have a control of our identity and say to ourselves that today I am developing my faith. And we don't need to look any further really than looking at the central feature of our existence and our creation, which is our nafs, the soul or self. And this soul or self, which is there not just within the Shia tradition, but in the Sunni tradition, within many other religions, this idea that the human being is directed by something inside of him or her, that we are driven by this entity, which some may say spiritual, which some may say celestial, some may say is linked to the body, some may say that it really has an existence after we die. What is this thing? And how can we understand it? How can we gain control of it? The nafs, therefore, presents the most crucial aspect or the final lens of this model of faith within Karbala, because al-Husayn alayhi salam repeatedly tells the Kufan people that you allowed your desires to overcome you. You allowed your desires to impinge on the Quran. It's as if they became senseless. It's as if they did not seem to have a direction in their life. So what was happening inside of them? In fact, al-Husayn says to the Kufan, says, away with the idols of the Ummah, the different kind of parties which exist, those people who deserted the Quran, those who followed shaitan, those who distorted meanings, those who did not pay attention to traditions, those who mocked the Quran, those who believed in some parts of the Quran and rejected others. He says, by God, I swear your disloyalty is expected, because it is entwined with your arteries. That means what they did was something which came from within themselves, according to al-Husayn. He says, you therefore are the bitterest fruit, and you give a person, or you make a person choke. May God curse these disloyal people who disregarded their firm oaths after they have already appointed God as their guarantor. So there was an inner conflict happening. They had already recognized the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it seems something had overtook them. And most importantly, the decision they made did not come from anywhere else. I mean, yesterday, if you remember, I talked about charisma and influential figures. I said on the one hand you have Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, and then you have Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Both are charismatic in their own way, trying to get support for their worldview. Now, you can say these are external forces. And I said that depending on our lens, on the way we look at the Prophet or Imam, we will be influenced in a particular way. But Imam Hussein here is being very specific. He's saying that these people were driven to make a decision by themselves. And that is rather significant and even scary, that a human being is capable of even going against this fitrah that is present in us. And there's a very important distinction here. In the Quran, as you know, Allah says that in Surah Bani Israel, He says, I have not given you knowledge of the spirit, the ruh, except a little. And then we also talk about the nafs. Now, what's the difference between the two, and what are we talking about? Because often these things can be confused, and often perhaps we don't know what conflict is happening inside of us. If we all have ruh, if we all have a spirit, what is it? If an animal has a spirit, if a mountain has a spirit, what is this? What differentiates us? Ruh often is defined as a life force, as a life-giving entity, as the spirit of Allah, or as a light. That's what ruh is. Not only is it there in the Quran, but especially in Nahj al-Balagha in Sermon 1, Imam Ali says that Allah blew His spirit into Adam alayhi salam. It was then that Adam alayhi salam started to distinguish between right and wrong, started to observe different colors, started to move. So ruh is actually something which gives life to us and which constantly remains with us. Perhaps the Urafah, the mystics, would say that it is actually a part of Allah. Just as we say we have a part of our mother inside of us. That there is this, this umbilical cord is never cut. You always feel close to your mom, always. Maybe not the dad, no, I don't know. Inshallah, maybe, was it daughters are favorites for their fathers and sons are favorites for their mothers? I don't know. But obviously, there is this very beautiful relationship between the mother and the child. And Urafah like to interpret Allah like that. That it's as if He has given a part of Himself to us. Because whatever we do, we will always try to have some kind of notion of forgiveness and mercy and feeling of good. However suppressed it is, doesn't matter. Here, the ruh, if you want to say very mystically, is that life force given by God Himself, or literally a part of God, which is in us. And that is in everything. It's not just in human beings. You can say animals, plants, mountains. When in the Quran, the mountains are talking, or the hills are giving praises, or the birds are giving praises. How do we understand this? That everything seems to be moved by Allah and has a part of Him in their existence. So what is nafs then? Some say that the ruh gives rise to the nafs. That once we have this life force in us, as we grow, as our limbs develop, as our faculties develop, our soul also grows. Sometimes it's very easy to say, God puts a spirit and God puts a soul and that's it. It's like the soul is there from before. Others, like Mullah Sadr, for example, have said that actually the nafs grows. It grows as the human being grows. So you take a baby, and a baby's faculties and appreciation of the world is very minimal actually. But as the baby develops, or as we develop, we start to develop a very multidimensional personality and identity. We are able to think deeply. We're able to be influenced by what others say. We don't now just listen to our parents. We also listen to our friends. We listen to our teachers. We say, right, my teacher says this and my dad says this, or my friends have said this. So our capacity to distinguish between things, just as in the case of Adam alayhi salam, is the same. We start to develop. So the nafs actually is dependent on our ability to grow and develop as human beings. But then there is also something deeper with nafs. Nafs, as many has defined, and even according to classical dictionaries, is defined as soul or self, as I-ness, as personality, as identity, as ego. This is nafs. Literally, nafs is our personality. Maybe that's the easiest way of putting it. It's our personality. It's what we make of ourselves in this life. And that molded thing goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in whatever we have done. Who I am, what actions I've done, how I perceive God, how I see the world, all of that, whatever I have made for myself and who I have become, goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the nafs is arguably the thing that is us now, is me speaking, is my nafs. Often we say it's just something inside of us, but according to a very beautiful hadith by a first Imam, he says, and there's a similar understanding in Greek philosophy as well, that the nafs has four compartments. Some say there are four souls actually, four souls, or some say four compartments of one soul. We have our vegetative part of our soul. We have our animalistic part of our soul. We have the intellective part, and we have the godly or celestial or spiritual part. And Imam Ali actually says, and the hadith I found in Biharul Anwar, but it is used a great deal by philosophers, especially by Shia philosophers. They say that these parts of the soul are directly connected to the body. And when I read this, I was trying, and I'm still trying to understand how this works, but it seems to me that our soul isn't just something which is like, is not just spiritual. It's not just, doesn't have any substance. It seems to be directly connected with everything that we do. So when we say you are what you eat, as we often say to each other, in this sense we mean it. Because our direct contact with our environment and how we grow affects who we are at the end of the day. So he says that the vegetative part of the soul is to do with one's growth, the development of limbs, for example, and bodily organs. And the origin of this part of the soul comes from the liver. So he now makes a connection with our organs or our biology. So our liver is now connected to this part of the soul. And therefore, as I said, whatever we eat and our environment and the way we interact with physical things seems to affect our identity as well. Then he says our animalistic part, which is basically our desires, our ability to feel pleasure and pain, our ability to get angry or feel happy. All of these things come from our heart. And our qalb, or our heart, gives rise to certain feelings. Again, you can see the connection between biology and metaphysics, or biology and spirituality. So this part of the soul is connected with our heart. Then he says the intellective or rational part. He says this part does not have any link with the body as such. So when we say mind, we say where is the mind? People often say, and in the Quran, the terms aql and qalb and nafs are used interchangeably. So it means somehow we have an ability to think, which you may say is fitra, which you may say is our natural discernment of right or wrong, but that doesn't have any bodily connection as such. And we know this as well because as the soul returns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we still have the ability to think, but we don't have the body. And finally, and this is maybe the most beautiful part of our soul, which links to Iman, the fourth part of our soul is the godly part. And the reason why it is most beautiful, he says in the hadith, that a human being, through this part of himself or herself, is able to find felicity, happiness in misfortune. He's able to find patience whilst there is distress. He's able to find contentment through or after greed. It means that there is a part of us that directly links to the very attributes or asma al-husna of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How wonderful is that? That Allah, as I said, if He has given a part of Himself to us, this part of our soul, if ever we have felt in our salah, if we've prayed one salah in our life, and we have felt a sense of elevation, or when we have given in charity, or after the fast, after 20, 25, 28, 29 days, we now don't want to give up fasting. We want to continue fasting. There is that feeling now that I've got used to not eating food. I've got used to maybe not speaking ill of others. I don't know, is it opposite for other people? Okay. I thought usually that's a Muslim feeling. That at least at the end of Ramadan we start to miss it. No? Come on, we have to be good Muslims at least. Okay. Maybe just me then. Okay. Well, anyway, hopefully, if any spiritual act that we do, even if it is one part in our life, that we have felt some kind of elevation, that transcendental feeling, that spiritual feeling, that sense that I don't care what happens to me now, I don't care if I die tomorrow, I don't care what happens to my parents, my children, my society. There is that sense that we understand inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. It is that part which is directly connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and which resembles the true faith and the true iman, which is that yaqeen of Imam alayhi salam, that certainty that we believe that we are moving to God. That sense that we have accomplished that adl in us, that fairness and justice. That sense we have overcome our worldly temptations now. I don't need to be greedy anymore. I'm happy to be patient. Imagine saying that to yourself and how difficult it is. That is when that faith becomes complete. The central feature, therefore, to cultivate our iman has to be the soul. And how much we focus on it then depends on how much we increase or decrease our faith. Salawat, please. The reason also it is a very important aspect of Islam and arguably other religions is because of the hadith that we have. We have a very beautiful hadith from the first Imam in Ghurad al-Hikam. And he says, the self is like a precious jewel. Whoever strives for its protection, it will help him attain exalted positions. Exactly what we have been talking about. And whoever acts negligently in its protection, whoever fails to protect the nafs, it shall pull him towards humiliation. This is what we have inside of us. We have a jewel inside of us. And a jewel, and the reason why this word is used, because nafs comes from nafusa, which is something precious and valuable. We have this jewel, and a jewel has to be adorned. It has to be protected. It has to be kept well. That's what jewelry is. So if we look at ourselves like that, we would like to always see ourselves as something to be protected and to display it to others as a beautiful ornament. Our characters are beautiful ornaments to each other. But if we don't regard ourselves like that, if we don't attach value to our nafs, then inevitably we won't have that self-reflective function in our lives. We won't really evaluate ourselves. The last 3 lectures have been totally about how Kufans did not evaluate themselves. How al-Husayn is telling them that you did not keep a check on your desires. Now, if therefore we do not keep a check on our desires, we are always suppressing this godly part of ourselves. We're always having a rather imbalanced development. But our nafs needs to be taken care of. And if it isn't, then clearly we do not really take a path that is very genuine, that is not engaging in transcendental evaluation. And in fact, Mullah Sadr says something so beautiful, and I was researching the lecture yesterday, and it reflected what Imam Ali says about what we have inside of us. Imam Ali says in Sermon 1 that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent prophets or appointed prophets in order to unearth the buried treasures or the hidden treasures of our intellect, of our aql. You can say hidden treasures of our soul, hidden treasures inside of us. The prophets and imams, peace be upon them, are not the subject of existence. They are not. Of course, we praise them and we elevate them. Yes, and I love the Prophet. And I love Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. I love him because of what he has gone through, being put in prison, beaten up by his brothers, and what he became. The subject of existence is not them. The subject of existence is us. We are the ones. We are the ones whom the prophets came for. We are the ones that need to be reminded. And we have so much potential to reach these great stations, because at the end of the day, by only looking at the prophets as the subject and focus of our existence, we take away what we need to do in our lives. So we say, yes, Prophet, wonderful, we can't accomplish it. Well, what's the point of existence? What's the point of me striving anyway? And the reason I say this is because of a great quote by Mullah Sadra, the great Iranian philosopher. He says in the Elixir of Gnostics, he says that philosophy and the Quran agree entirely that learning the divine wisdom and the knowledge of the human soul, look how much emphasis is placing, knowledge of the human soul. He says, by that, by learning about the human soul, I mean the origin and return of the human being, where we came from and where we are going. If we understand this, it means we are winning endless subsistence, endless immortality, endless life in us. And if we reject the human self and reject this knowledge, we will feel emptiness. We'll feel an eternal loss in ourselves. This knowledge of the soul makes man the possessor of a great kingdom. It's exactly the words of Imam alayhi salam. This knowledge makes man the possessor of a great kingdom because it is the most magnificent potion. It shows that one does not need anything in the world. It is the greatest happiness and closely reflects the traits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What a beautiful quote. What do we have inside of us? I posed the question 3-4 lectures ago that if we have self-control and we have a sense of direction in our lives, like Wahab Hania, both of them a young married couple, and I posed the question, a lot of young people here, I'm youngish or whatever, I have to reflect on my life. What do I want to become? What do you want to become? Yes? If we pose that question, do we have the guts and the courage to say, no, I'm going to be like Wahab and Hania and sacrifice my personal and private happiness? Look at the distinction he's making. He says you don't need to attach yourself to worldly pursuits. That doesn't mean we are living in a cave and away from the world. No, it means all our energies, our bodily movements are directed to doing things which gives us a transcendence in ourselves and elevates society. What were Wahab and Hania's actions anyway? You could say, well, okay, they were martyrs, they're small actions. But in themselves, first of all, they were elevated and they did contribute to keeping the message of al-Husayn alive. Whatever they did, we don't know the impact of that. We don't know what impact our actions can do to other people and even to ourselves. So when we want to develop faith, first we have to recognize, number one, what kingdom we have inside of us and our capability. Number two, to give attention to that, to take time in the day, to actually say to myself or yourself, I'm now going to reflect on who I am. And third, to always make sure that our vegetative, our animalistic, our intellective and our godly part of the souls are always taken care of. That if we are focusing on one part and not the other, what is happening to us? And to also know that we can explicitly connect to God, because Imam Ali says that when we find that happiness within misfortune and we find that patience, that is when we are emulating the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat, please. Now, I want to end in the next 5 or 10 minutes by saying what techniques we can actually use to do this. How do we do this? And it sounds very beautiful and sounds very nice, and we might feel good at this time, but when we leave the lecture, what will happen? We go back to our normal lives. We have a very beautiful sermon, Sermon 87 by Imam Ali alayhi salam, which Ibn Abi al-Hadid in his Sharh of Nahj Balagha says that this sermon is the most beautiful sermon in Nahj Balagha for spiritual growth. He says in order to understand this sermon, we have to refer to the Urafa, to the mystics. That's how deep this sermon is. It's rather long actually. I'm only going to quote a few lines. This sermon, this treasure that we have in Nahj Balagha, which as I've said before, as a Shia community, I don't think we really pay attention to it, and those outside of the community don't really pay attention to it either, even though really it has got so many treasures in there. The reason I say this sermon is very beautiful for us is because it specifically tells us what Allah wants from us, who Allah likes, okay? And I'll read a few lines in Arabic, and as though those of you who have read Nahj Balagha, it's always very difficult to translate, always. Imam Ali is very concise, he's very eloquent, and he contains many concepts in a few words. This is Imam Ali alayhi salam, subhanallah, as we say Nahj Balagha, the peak of eloquence. So I will try my best, okay? And the reason I want to read it out to you is for us to appreciate his language. Okay, we all grew up with Shakespeare, those living in Britain, and we don't always study who is our Shakespeare or who is our very eloquent person, and this gives us a bit of an opportunity to do that. So this is what Imam Ali says. He says, Ibadallah, servants of God, inna min ahabbi ibadillahi ilayhi abdan a'anahu Allahi ala nafsi. Okay, he says, indeed, the most loved servant of Allah is one who Allah has given power to him over his nafs. That's the most loved servant of God. That's it. The one who Allah gives power to that person to overcome or control his identity. Because we said soul is identity, personality, I-ness, me. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves and likes. Forget everything else at the moment. Forget all other obligations in religion. This is the best servant of God. Somebody that knows where he or she is going. Somebody that's able to control his or her desires. Somebody that's able to sacrifice his or her life for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's it. And we see that everywhere. And we see that in history. This is the pinnacle of the servant. Then he says, فَاسْتَشْعَرَ الْحُزْنَ, that you seek to feel sadness, huzn, grief or sadness. It might seem, why is he very somber here? Continues, وَتَجَلْبَبَ الْخَوْفِ, and you clothe yourself with fear. فَزَحْرَ مِصْبَاحُ الْخُدَى فِي قَلْبِ, and so the lamp of guidance of Huda burns in his heart. Now you can see, what is Imam Ali saying here? It's very deep, literally. He's saying, and this is my humble interpretation, I might be wrong, I try to look at the sharh as well, and it's always difficult. In my humble view, I think what he's saying is that a person feels sad about what he is doing to himself, okay? What injustices he is doing to his or her soul. So if I backbite, if I'm greedy, what am I doing to myself? What am I becoming, okay? Then he says that this person also clothes himself, like jilbab, like a covering. This person clothes himself with fear. Why fear? Fear as to what he may do next. Fear as to what he may do in order to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is a fear there that if I've done something bad in my life, then if I have a fear, maybe I will stop doing it. Maybe this fear is a protective covering for me. And we say taqwa, people used to say, means God-fearing. But now, as I've read books, a lot of people say God consciousness, God awareness. Because you can't say, you just fear God, you have to love God as well. Right? Which is true, you have to have a balance. And that makes sense now in the next statement. He says that this person has a lamp of guidance burning in his heart. Why? Because if a person feels sad and remorseful about the actions he has done in his life or she has done in his life, and then has this protective covering of fear, then in between the two, in between sadness and fear, you experience true love. You experience true light, which is God himself. When we say that if I say I love you, or you love somebody in your family, okay? If you say love, that love is based upon a human relationship. If I feel happy about my deed, that's fine, but it's not true love. True love and true light and true happiness is the feeling that we have pleased God, that we now have explicitly connected to God, that we have moved from one level of existence to another. And we are guided by God in our actions. We're not guided by sadness anymore. We're not guided by fear. We're not guided because you love me, I love you. It's because we love Allah and we are driven by His light. We are driven by His guidance, which is why in the middle of the sermon, Imam Ali says that somebody that has this guidance in his heart, somebody that submits totally to Allah, God will make him His own. God will make him His own. It's as if God now will take control of his faculties. God will be the movement in his life. God will be the center of attraction and direction. Whereas can we say that at every thought in our life? When we pray, sometimes we are distracted. When we fast, what are we thinking? Always our thoughts seem to be distracted, or there are obstacles which make us stop remembering or feeling a continual stream of existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says that a person that actually has power over his nafs, a person that has that, means that a person that truly feels remorseful about his actions and uses fear as a protective covering, and then is able to garner a true love and light in himself to be guided by Allah. I'll just read a bit more and then I'll end. He also says that a person, the loved person, is a person that remembers the Day of Judgment. Somebody that knows that his life or her life is not going to last very long. And we don't know when death will come and befall us. We don't know. Could be today, could be tonight, could be tomorrow. We don't know. Therefore, a person that has death on his or her mind and has the understanding that he will return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a person that has God as his or her focus. Then he uses something very beautiful, and look at the Arabic here. He says, فَقَرَّبَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الْبَعِيدِ وَحَوَّنَ الشَّدِيدِ نَذَرَ فَأَبْصَرَ وَذَكَرَ فَاسْتَكْثَرَ. It's very beautiful. It rhymes, and that's known as sajj, full rhyming. So he's now trying to communicate spiritual concepts, but he's rhyming it. I can't even, I'm giving 30 minutes of a lecture. That's how we appreciate Imam alayhi salam. That he's able to communicate mystical concepts, but using rhyme, using eloquence, using literary techniques. And what was he saying here? He was saying that this type of person takes a near thing to be far away and a far away thing to be near. So a near thing to be far away, meaning that if somebody is insulting me, if there is some distress in my life, I actually regard it as something very light, as something just far away. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't shake my faith. It doesn't stop my God consciousness. And if something that is far away I take near, it means something that could happen to me, like death or Day of Judgment. I take that as very, very important. So he's looking at nafs and iman, trying to give us some idea as to what we should think about on a day-to-day basis. And then he ends saying that a person should always think and look, and should always dhikr, that means remember, and should increase his actions. So a godly person and a faithful person is somebody that constantly is doing dhikr of Allah and is reflecting, always engaging in tafakkur, the self-evaluation process. If it's one thing, as a 1 or 2 line conclusion of these 4 lectures, if it's one thing that we learn from Karbala, for Karbala to be this paradigm and to be this model or pattern for our lives, it's that we want to be of those people that really undertook this journey and this challenge of saying, I have a great kingdom in myself, and I'm going to sacrifice my worldly happiness, and I'm going to join al-Husayn. And that we will not be like the Kufans. Salawat. Jazakallah, I think we can open it up, inshallah. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So far, brothers and sisters, we now come to the family of al-Husayn alayhi salam. We come to those people who realized that they did have a great kingdom in themselves. People like Qasim alayhi salam, the son of Imam Hassan, who saw within himself as a fairly teenager or young man that he decided that in his life what was important was following the message of his uncle al-Husayn alayhi salam. It is reported that on the eve of Ashura, when the Imam started to talk to his faithful followers, Qasim was there. And he asked al-Husayn alayhi salam, he said, "Oh uncle, will I also be killed?" The Imam embraced him and said, "Oh child, how do you find death?" And as we all know, what did he say? He said, "I find death to be sweeter than honey." Imam Hussain alayhi salam, with tears rolling down his cheek, sensed, "You will also be killed, along with the infant Abdullah Ali Askar." When Qasim readied himself for battle, he said, "I am the son of al-Hassan, if you are unaware, the grandson of the messenger, the chosen, the trusted. This is Hussein, like a captive held in ransom for people whose thirst may not be quenched by the falling rain." Qasim advanced into battle, and people were not forgiving. People saw this person and they were marveled by what this person was doing going into battle. when Qasim was struck, he said, "Oh uncle, come to my aid, where are you? I have gone into battle, I have followed you, please come to my aid, oh uncle." The Imam was standing there and he attempted to come to Qasim's aid, but Qasim was alas struck and was bleeding, and the horses trampled on him. Finally, when Imam Hussein alayhi salam went to Qasim, the Imam put his cheek on the torn chest of Qasim and he started crying. He said, "Oh child, it is unbearable that you called out to your old uncle and I could not come to your help. And when I did, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't help you. I couldn't stop the bleeding." The Imam took Qasim's body into his arms. He carried Qasim. He placed Qasim's body next to his son Ali Akbar. And he said, "Oh my nephews, persevere, oh my children, have patience. By Allah, you will not see any grief after this day. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." May Allah elevate the stations of the shuhada. Surah Al-Fatiha.